My goal is to give you the timely insights and tips to help you master the game of finance and ultimately help you achieve your goal. Hello, this is Connie from Prosperity Finance. The bad news is we are in lockdown again. I hope your life is going well during the lockdown. I know there's a lot of inconveniences, especially the parents who have to work during the lockdown and look after your kids. Tell me about it. I don't know how I'm going to juggle anyway. But the good news, I guess, is you can spend more time with your loved ones and maybe do something that you don't really have time to do normally. So everything has two sides. Let's be graceful. So today I'm going to talk about commercial property. Why I choose this topic? Well, recently I have been asked by a few clients about whether investing in commercial property is a good idea. I guess the reason they ask is quite obvious. There's some policies from the government, from the banks, are not really in favor of residential investment property, such as the bright line rule, such as interest deductibility policy, etc., and the LVR rule. So it makes commercial probably more attractive because they are exempt from these rules. And also the residential property are getting more expensive. So if you have a limited budget, maybe you could look at investing commercial properties. So today I'm going to talk about the benefit and downside of commercial property so that we can help you make informed decision. Right. So firstly, let's start with the benefits. And let's start with investment aspects, and then I'll cover the owner-occupied. So investment means you purchase a commercial property and you have a tenants using the property and you get the rental income, just like a residential investments. So what are the benefits? Some of the benefits are permanent, such as higher rental yield. Now, let's look at the residential rental yield. So in Auckland, you probably expect 3% on average. This is actually a good deal. People buy it at 3%. Whereas commercial, you probably expect 5 to 6% rental yield. It's very common. So if you are after cash flow, commercial property, it is a very good option. Now, the second benefit is that there's actually very little cost investing in commercial property. Unlike residential property, once you own that property, you probably still need to pay for insurance, pay the rates, pay water fixed charge, and ongoing property management fee, etc., and maintenance. So the list just goes on. Whereas commercial property, most of these costs are actually shared by your tenants, not you. So it's called outgoings. So if you look at the lease agreements, so there's one clause about who's going to cover the outgoings, and the default option is your tenants. So you don't really need to worry about that. Even the body cop, they will pay for that. So it's very good cash flow strategy to invest in commercial property. Now, the third benefit is that you can claim depreciation against the commercial building. That's not applicable with residential property. So it's more kind of a tax efficient. And the next benefit is diversification. So if you already have a portfolio of residential investment property, having a commercial property help you to balance the asset types. So kind of minimize the risk of investing. And now I'm going to cover a few more points that's actually related to the recent policy change. So next benefit is the loan-to-value ratio, LVR. Now, you probably remember last year, if you purchase a residential investment property, you only need to provide 20% deposit. But now it's 40% again. With commercial investment property, you can provide 35% as minimum deposit. Sometimes you do need to provide more, but 30% is definitely possible. So it requires less deposit than a residential property. So that's to do with the LVR. The next benefits is to do with the bright line rule and interest deduction policy that was introduced by the Labour government early this year. Now, if you remember, they said these rules have commercial property exempt. Therefore, commercial property, you can still claim the interest as part of your investment cost, so that you don't have to pay the same level of tax as a residential property. Same as a bright line rule, there's no bright line rule for commercial property. So that's really good. Now, the next point is with the budget. So with a residential property in Auckland, if you want to buy a relatively reasonable reasonable land, then it will going to I repeat again. The next point is to do with the budget. So with Auckland, for example, if you're looking to buy a residential property as investment, you probably have to expect, over 1 mil kind of budget, especially if you want to purchase a property with a reasonable kind of a land size. It probably can easily cost you over 1.5 million. However, with commercial property, you can, if you have a limited budget, you can find a really good quality commercial property. Recently, we had a client bought a warehouse in South Auckland. There are multiple offers, a lot of demand, and it was only 600K. So it's a really good investment. And because there's a demand, so there's a good chance that those type of commercial property has a good capital growth. So it's actually a very good deal if you have a limited budget. So the budget can be an advantage at the moment with a commercial property as investment. And the next point is to do with the property cycle. Now, normally the residential property and a commercial property has a different property cycle. When the residential property is in the boom stage, commercial property tend to be flat. In contrast, when the residential property is in a flat market, commercial property, start, increase in equity. So it kind of different, at a different wave. So if you have a mix of residential and commercial property, you kind of have a consistent of capital growth. So it's a very good strategy in terms of investing. Now, the next point is servicing ability. So that means how much loan can you afford? Now, you probably have reached the glass ceiling. If you buy a residential investment property, your bank probably tell you, sorry, you can't borrow more. You already borrowed to the maximum. However, with a commercial property, even you have borrowed to the maximum, potentially you can borrow more to buy a commercial property, because the way they analyze your borrowing capacity in terms of commercial investment is quite different from residential. So as long as you can demonstrate you can cover the existing residential property loan payments, commercial property lending is mainly driven by the commercial rental income. So you may be able to buy another property and add it to your property portfolio. So that's pretty much all the upsides of investing in commercial property. Now I'm quickly go over the owner-occupied benefits. What I mean by owner-occupied, let's say you have a business and you need an office or you need a factory, etc. for your own business. Then you can consider, instead of renting, you can have an option of buying existing commercial property and use it yourself for your own business. So there are two additional benefits if you are kind of owner-occupied. So firstly, if you need specialized built property, such as if you have a daycare business or a kind of motel business, or I have a client, they have a swimming schools. So instead of finding a property with a swimming lane, they can have their own and build their swimming lane. So the investments that to build that purpose-built property can be easily retained rather than doing it for your landlord. So that's kind of really important reason people buy their owner-occupied commercial property. Now the second benefit is it kind of prevents you from paying increased rent over time. Because that's your own property, you don't have to increase rents every year or two if you rent it. But bear in mind, there's opportunity cost as well. Let's say you have the option of buying commercial property for your own business, and you also can invest your money into residential property or other form of investments. Then there will be an opportunity cost. If you rent the commercial property instead of purchasing, you may be able to get better capital growth if you invest in other type of assets. So you have to consider kind of overall picture, not just from the rent perspective. So now I have summarized some of the benefits of buying commercial property from both investment aspects and owner-occupied aspects. Now I'm going to quickly go over some weakness if you're buying commercial property so that you can make informed decision. So the first one is to do with the vacancies. If you have a residential property, the vacancies are relatively low. Even your tenants give you short notice, but because there's a market of residential investment property market, you kind of expect you can get tenants very quickly, like within a couple of weeks even. So the vacancy is very low compared to commercial. For example, the building we occupied at the moment, some of the offices has been empty for over a year, so it can be very long vacancy. This has become worse after COVID because a lot of people work from home, so the demand for offices are much less. Obviously, you have to consider individual kind of cases. Now, recently, I had a conversation with a commercial property expert. So she told me that a lot of people used to work in the CBD. Now, they looking for offices in the region. For example, North Shore offices are in a good demand. So, so it's not always the case, but overall, offices are in less demand after COVID. So you need to be aware, especially if you buy a vacant commercial property, or even you have existing tenants there, but the lease is very short, like only a year or two. Then what if they leave, they don't renew? Then how long can you replace them? So you need to be aware of the vacancy time. Now, the second potential downside is the capital growth. Use office as example. Now, the capital growth for commercial property, one of the big factor is the lease income. So if you don't have tenants or the lease income is not increased quickly, then the capital growth is very limited. But it's not always the case. At the moment, for example, industrial property are in demand. So it doesn't matter if it's vacant or not, it still grow at a good pace. So it's nothing is kind of one size fits all. But generally speaking, capital growth for commercial property is less than residential property. The next point is the commercial property require different skill sets and knowledge from investing in residential property. If you are going to purchase your first commercial property, you do need to do some homework and build your knowledge base before you go ahead and buy one. Now, the last but not least is I just want to emphasize that if you have a commercial property and you already settled and you have a loan, just make sure that if your tenant leave, you need to quickly replace your tenants, especially you only have one tenant. Because when the bank lends you the money for buying commercial property, their loan term normally align with your lease finish term. So if you have one tenant and the lease term is 3 years, even though they give you a 15-year amortization period, but the loan term is only going to be 3 years because they want to review your position and see how the lease is going to be after 3 years. Are they going to renew their lease or are you going to replace them? They want to know because the lease income is the kind of repayment source. If they don't have a lease in place, then that means you can't repay in their eyes. So that's why they limit their loan term to the lease finish term. So we have a real example where the clients had tenants at the time of placing the commercial loan, but then the tenants left, and when the bank reviewed their tenant's schedule, they realized that there's no tenant anymore. But the clients is comfortable because they have a good cash flow from other sources, from other properties or their job income. So they thought that's fine. But bank said, hey, I'll give you, a couple months to find another tenants, otherwise you have to repay the loan. So it's put them into very stressful kind of stage. So just bear in mind that the bank for commercial loan, they only consider the lease income. If you don't have lease income, you are running a risk of repaying the loan with such short notice. So that doesn't exist in the residential investment property loan. They normally give you 25, 30 years. So they not come back and check if you have tenants or not. So that's pretty much everything I can think of in terms of the benefit and the downside of buying commercial property, and in both kind of investment terms and owner-occupied terms. So I hope that helps you kind of clear the mind and help you make a decision if you are thinking about, investing or buying commercial property. Thank you so much for watching, and please take care of yourself and hopefully everything back to normal soon. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.